Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
Welcome back to Israel Unplugged. This is Josh Wander from Yerushalayim Mir HaKodesh. I'm here with my co-host, Rabbi Moshe Lichtman from Beit Shemesh.
Yes, hello. Thank you for joining us.
This is a live show, and you are more than welcome to call in and give your comments and your suggestions about Aliyah, about the Aliyah process, about what's going on in current events, what is going on with anti-Semitism around the world. To call into our live show, if you are unfortunately stuck in North America, the number would be 301-768-4841. And if you're fortunate enough to be here in the land of Israel, the number would be 02-650-0151. Israel Unplugged is where you get the unadulterated facts of where we're holding in the redemptive process, focusing primarily on the ingathering of the exiles. And today we have an exciting show lined up for you, speaking about this week's Torah portion of Shalach, the Torah portion which deals with the spies, the spies that were sent out to provide a good report about the land. And unfortunately, the vast majority of them came back with a bad report. And we are living to tell the tale today, and we are still being punished in exile today for this terrible deed that was done way back when. We would love to explain.
Because we haven't yet learned the lesson, unfortunately. We are still continuing the same sin thousands of years later.
And it is one amongst a number of national sins which we're going to discuss that happened to the Jewish people, and that the Jewish people en masse have to repent for. So this show is coming up. It's going to be an exciting one. You should stick with us, and make sure that you call in and give your comments. If you have a chance, check out Rabbi Lichtman's website at toratzion.com and my website at bringthemhome.org.il or itstimetolive.com, and enjoy all of the great books and lectures and podcasts, as well as this live show that comes to you, and videos that comes to you weekly. See you soon.
Israel is located in one of the most volatile areas in the world. Israel is an island of stability in a sea of war and unrest. In the midst of this turmoil, Israel stands out as a beacon of order and human progress. Each week we update you on what's happening in this, the Jewish state, a true light unto the nations. This is Jay Shapiro. Join me every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Israel Unplugged. So if you're listening to us from China, ni hao, and if you're listening to us from Jamaica, then Yemen, and those that are listening to us from California, all I could say is, dude, what are you doing there? Anyways, we are back to Israel Unplugged. I'm here with Rabbi Moshe Lichtman, who has an enormous amount of material to speak about on this week's Torah portion. So let's get into it.
Yeah, it's really a hard decision what to talk about, because there's just so much. I actually once had an idea to write an entire book on just the sin of the spies. That's how important it is. You see, we all want the redemption. We all want God to redeem the Jewish people. And yes, there are certain statements in the writings of our rabbis that indicate what we need to do in order to bring the redemption. Like, for example, the most famous one is that the reason why the second temple was destroyed. Well, let's start with the first one. The first one was destroyed because of the three cardinal sins: adultery, idolatry, and murder. But the second temple, where they were not doing those things, they were very righteous people, seemingly. So the Talmud asks, so why was it destroyed? And the Talmud in Yoma 9b says, because of sinat chinam, because of unbased or baseless hatred. So that's why everyone says one of the most important things to do is to love one's fellow Jew, even if there's no good reason to do so. Just like they hated their fellow Jew for no good reason. So we have to love our fellow Jews, even if there's not really a good reason to do so. And I'm not taking away from that. That is certainly true, and that is certainly something that we need to work on. But it starts so much earlier than that, because we know that the saddest day of the year in the Jewish calendar is Tisha B'Av. In fact, we're coming up on what's called the 3 weeks of mourning for the destruction of the temple between the 17th of Tammuz and the 9th of Av. And the Talmud in Tractate Ta'anit discusses why are these days so sad? What happened on these days? So it says that the 5 bad things happened on the 17th of Tammuz. The first one being the sin of the calf, the golden calf. And then that led to other tragedies. And then it says there are 5 bad things that happen also on Tisha B'Av. And the root sin was the Chet HaMeraglim, the sin of the spies. And the rabbis actually say, it says in this week's parsha, that when the spies came back with the bad report, so the people cried. And the rabbis learn that date, they have a tradition, that date was the 9th of Av. And God said, you cried for no good reason. I will give you reason to cry throughout history. And that's why both temples were destroyed on that day, and other terrible tragedies happened on that day. So if we really want to rectify the start of it all, the beginning of it all, the reason why all of our tragedies happen, we have to go back to the source. And the source is the rejection of the land of Israel, because that's what happened on Tisha B'Av. That's what happened on the 9th of Av. We rejected Eretz Yisrael, and that led to all the terrible tragedies that we have suffered throughout. And you notice, by the way, that the sin of the golden calf, which if you would ask most people, what's worse, to bow down to a golden calf instead of God, or to just not want to go into the land that he promised us? Most people would say, idolatry is much worse. But God didn't think so, because God forgave the Jewish people for the golden calf. And by the way, only 3,000 Jews died because of that sin, because those are the ones who actually participated. But when it came to the sin of the spies, that was a sin that God could not overlook. He said, this entire generation has to die out. Their children will go into the land of Israel. But they themselves will not. I cannot forgive them for such a thing, for rejecting this land that I promised to give to them. And that is the source of all of our troubles. In fact, there's this quote that I want to read for you from the Akedat Yitzchak. The Akedat Yitzchak was Rabbi Yitzchak Arama, one of the great commentators on the Torah. He says, despising the land is the issue that has risen up in every generation to destroy us. Because of it, we were exiled from our land, driven far from our soil, and have been a disgrace to our neighbors. And listen to this line. There is absolutely no way to return to our perfected state except by returning to it, the land of Israel. And that's what I mean, that it all starts here. This is the main thing we have to focus on, coming back to the land of Israel. Once we're back here, our other problems will melt away. God will help us overcome our other issues. He first wants to see that we are going to rectify that age-old problem that we have called despising the land.
What was so bad about what the spies did. A spy, as we know, is are sent out in order to give a honest report of what they see and bring that back. They're not supposed to skew it. They're not supposed to change it. They're not supposed to, right? They're supposed to just report on what they see. And that's exactly seemingly what they did. They went into the land and they reported exactly what they saw. What was such a terrible sin about what the spies did?
So the Ramban, Nachmanides, discusses that very issue, and he says, just like you said, there was nothing wrong with sending spies. We're not supposed to rely on miracles and just expect God to just conquer our enemies with nothing. We have to do like the normal people do. That is to send spies to see how to attack.
Reconnaissance mission.
Right, exactly. And there was nothing wrong with the information they gave. The problem was in one word. Right, Josh? You know this word?
Yes.
Ephes. Ephes. Ki az ha'am. The first part of what they said was, we came into the land, and it has milk and honey. And then they said, but ki az ha'am, the nation there is strong. And the cities are fortified, etc. If they would have just said, okay, here's the facts. They seem like a very strong nation, and their cities are fortified. Okay, so what? We have God on our side. We have Moshe Rabbeinu. We've seen miracles galore. We're not afraid. We know that God can take care of this. That would have been fine. But they said Ephes. Ephes means but. Even though, yeah, there's good parts, but. But sounds like it's just not going to happen. We are not going to be able to conquer these people. They are way too strong for us. They actually went on to say that. Ki chazakhu mimenu. The word mimenu in Hebrew could mean they are stronger than us, mimenu, but it also could mean stronger than him, mimenu, him. And the rabbis say that their real intention was chazaku mimenu, they're stronger than him, God. They can overpower God. It showed a lack of faith in God, that he's able to fulfill his promise to the Jewish people to bring them into the land of Israel. And I think we should discuss how that affects us today, because, okay, that's way back. But what about today? Let's hear what you have to say, Josh.
Well, I was going to ask another question, which is, who do they influence? Meaning, clearly they with that one word, Ephes, they changed the whole narrative, and it destroyed the morale that they had until, this momentum that they had going out of Egypt until that point. But who were they? Clearly, they didn't influence the next generation, because the next generation did succeed in entering the land. So exactly whose morale did they ruin, and how did they ruin it? Like you said, if it's God, if they, they understand that God is behind them, then what is the havamina, as we say? What are they thinking that perhaps these people in the land are going to be able to be stronger than God? And in this case, it seems that clearly they had ulterior motives involved, right? That they had some reason that they wanted to stay back and did not want to go into the land. What could be their ulterior motives?
So there's two questions here you're asking. What's the ulterior motives, and who did they really affect? So let's start with the ulterior motives. So there's plenty, but there's Shelah, the Shnei Luchot HaBrit, and the Zohar, who said, I don't remember who says what. There's two famous things that I don't remember which is which. But one of them says that they simply didn't want to lose their positions of power, because they were Nisiim, they were princes in the desert, and they knew that going into Israel, things would be different. There's going to be a new order of things, and maybe they won't get appointed to their high positions. Unfortunately, we're going through that right now in the political system here in Israel, of people who are making decisions based on what's called how do you say it in Hebrew?
Ego.
It's what?
Ego,
no, but kiseology or something like that, basically on the kisei, the seat, they can keep their seats. Anyway, it doesn't matter. That's number one. And the Zohar says, I think it's pretty clear that it was the Zohar, that they had frum, they had religious reason. They said, we have everything here. We have Moshe Rabbeinu teaching us Torah. We have the man, the manna bread. We don't have to work for a living. We have the clouds protecting us. Why would we want to go into Eretz? We have the greatest kollel ever. But they didn't understand that that's not God's intention. God's intention is not for us to live a supernatural life. He wants us to live in the land of Israel, keeping the mitzvot of Hashem in the land of Israel, a normal life. And they were so unbelievably from, again, religious, that they wanted to continue this desert situation for a long time. Okay, we'll get back to you after the break. Don't go anywhere. We have a lot more to talk about.
The Tamar Yona Show.
Tamar? She's sassy.
She's smart.
She's funny.
But she's also a real Jewish mother.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tamar Yona. And yes, I can be all of those things, but at Israel News Talk Radio, I'm here to bring you the news stories and guests that you may not hear anywhere else. Join me live on air Sundays, Mondays, and Tuesdays for the most unique and bold talk radio in Israel.
The Tamar Yona Show.
Shalom, I'm Leah Aharoni. Join me on my show, News from the Torah. Each Sunday, we'll use the weekly Torah portion as a prism for understanding the news today. Listen to News from the Torah to gain clarity about the times we're living in and to understand your own spiritual path in the process. News from the Torah every Sunday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Okay, welcome back to Israel Unplugged. So we're in the middle of discussing the sin of the spies, and in a minute we're going to try to take it to today's day and age and learn the lessons. But Josh asked another question. He said, who did this affect? Because if you really think about it, they were talking to Moshe and Aaron. They said, Ephes ki azam, we're not going to be able to conquer them. So Moshe and Aaron should have said to them, be quiet. You don't know what you're talking about. And that would have been the end of it. But the Midrash tells us that this was not, what happened was after they spoke to Moshe and Aaron, they went around to all the tribes of Israel and they started telling them, oh, you can't believe how terrible it was. Oh, you can't believe how strong they are. How, your fate is sealed. If you go into the land, you're going to be destroyed by these giants that live in the land. And they basically used, the way Rav Teichtal in Ema Barim Smecha puts it, they used the modern tool of propaganda. They used propaganda to affect the Jewish people and make them start crying. And as I said before, so because of this whole Hatzaga, this whole play, this whole thing that they put on to try to scare people, people started getting really scared. And it spread like wildfire, and everyone started to cry. And that's when God said, you cried for no reason, I'm going to give you a reason to cry. So really what was expected of the Jewish people was to tell them, get out of here. Like, who are you? We're not going to buy your propaganda. We know that Moshe told us that God promised us the land. And if God promised it to us, he can do it, and he's going to bring it. He's going to bring us in. And Rav Teichtal says that we learn, again, whatever sin we committed in the olden days, we're supposed to try to rectify it and do the opposite. So if the sin of the spies was propaganda for against the land of Israel, we have to do propaganda for the land of Israel. We have to start telling everybody how beautiful the land is and how great of a life you can live here in the land of Israel, and how much, all the positives. Basically, we have to tell everybody how the cup is half full and not half empty, even though no one's going to deny that there are negatives, that there are problems. Like we said, the spies were supposed to tell the truth, but it depends on how your inflection and how whether you blow it out of proportion or not. And that was the sin of the spies, and we have to do the opposite. We have to tell people how beautiful it is to live here, and we have to encourage people to come. And again, in that way, we will hopefully rectify the sin of the spies, and God will remember us and bring us back to the land and destroy our enemies, etc., etc.
How apropos this is to today when we are witnessing a wave of anti-Semitism that is going across the world, especially through social media, but also on the streets. And we're watching the things pop up on TikTok and on Facebook and on Instagram and on
Twitter.
all these different, and Twitter, that just this campaign of anti-Israel, anti-Semitic rhetoric, which perhaps has not been seen maybe since the Holocaust. This is just, it's unbelievable. And definitely they didn't have the influence that they had for forever, because we never had this modern
Social
technology.
media, right.
So what they're able to do now, just a few of them to get together, these anti-Semites, even if there's just a few of them, they're able to have so much, that disproportionate amount of influence through the social media. And we are able to do the opposite. We are able to stand up and say that Israel is not an apartheid state. It is not an immoral state. It is not. We're not murdering. We're not choosing to intentionally murder Palestinian babies, and unfortunately, I think that they have the upper hand. I see that there's a lot more anti-Israel sentiment out there than there is pro-Israel sentiment, and perhaps this is an opportunity for all those that are listening and for all those people that are out there. I know how difficult it is, especially in the younger generation, people that are on U.S. college campuses especially. There's just so much rhetoric out there, and it's coming not only from the student body, but it's also coming from the faculty, and students are literally afraid to speak up. And it's so unfortunate, but this is their time. This is the time when, and this is what we're learning from this week's parasha, that's when you hear something that's negative that's being said about the land of Israel, about the people of Israel, it is exactly at that time that we need to stand up and make a statement that this is not true, and to bring the reality and the truth to light.
I have to disagree with you to a certain degree. What do I mean? Of course, you're correct, and of course, we have to do our best to try to influence and try to bring the truth, like you said. But I have learned from my many years watching this on the side and just seeing the hatred grow and grow, that I have come to the conclusion, you might disagree with me, that there is very little we can do to make these people like us and to listen to our side. They don't even listen to our side. There's no way you're going to convince an anti-Semite that let's put it this way. The facts are so obvious. The truth is so obvious to anybody who wants to actually step back and really look at it with a fair, unbiased way. And so why don't they see it? Why? It's because they don't care. They're not trying to get the truth. That's why they'll just attack people. They're not. Have you ever see these videos of these these supposed discussions online that they have on college campuses? It's not a discussion. It's violence against any Jew or anybody who's pro-Israel who wants to start talking. They just shout him down. They don't give him a chance. They don't say, no, I'll prove to you from statistics that what you're saying is not true. They're not going to try to convince them with facts, because they don't have facts. It's just a pure hatred for the Jewish people, and I don't see any way to overcome that. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have people fighting for it. Organizations like Honest Reporting and many others, right? Who are doing an amazing job. But I don't think that if we all get into that, we all start doing it, it's going to make a major difference. What I think we have to do is just talk to the Jews, talk to our fellow Jews and say, guys, you see what's happening here? You see how much they hate you? You see how much the hatred there is in their eyes? It's time to come home. We have to just come home and in that way defeat our enemies. That's the best way to defeat our enemies. You can hate us all you want. You can say whatever you want, but we're just going to keep on growing and growing and adding more and more Jewish population to the land of Israel until we're way over 50% of the Jewish people, hopefully much, much more than that, millions and millions more Jews coming home. There'll be nothing to talk about. They can complain all they want. They could say, you're taking over our land. You know what? You could talk till you're blue in the face. It's not going to make a difference. We have millions of Jews coming back, and we're settling them throughout the land, and you're not going to get that land back. That's all. The only reason they have this gusto and this chutzpah to say what they say is because we're not yet, we're a majority, but we're not yet enough of a majority to shut them down with facts on the ground. And that, to me, is where I think the main emphasis has to be placed, and not on trying to convince people online that that we're right. They don't want to hear. They don't care. They're so convinced one way that I think it's a lost battle to begin with. What do you think?
No, so just to clarify my position, I agree with you 100%. When I said that we need to fight it, I didn't mean to fight it amongst the anti-Semites. I don't think we're going to be able to change the anti-Semites to be pro-Israel advocates, but we do have to make the statement for the Jews, and that's exactly what I was suggesting and advocating, and that's what we were talking about before about the sin of the spies, and who it was influenced. Clearly, it was not influencing our enemies. We weren't trying to have a positive or negative influence on the Canaanim or on the Amalekis. We were it was all about the Jewish nation and how they view themselves and how they view their own position. And clearly today, this is what is most lacking, I think, in the societies in North America, the Jewish communities and universities, is the self-esteem for proud Jews to stand up and say that we are proud of it. First of all, to understand why, what we're talking about, what the background is. Most people don't. They're so brainwashed, and they're so just force-fed these false narratives that they don't even know what the truth is themselves. So we have to start to pound in on them the idea, the true narratives, what it means, and hopefully with that understanding and with that knowledge, not only will they be able to answer the people that are accusing them, but it will also give them the encouragement to come home and we've spoken about this, I think, before, that the idea of, and there are many Jews that say this, we have to be in America because we're influencing America, right? We have to be there in order to have the influence we have in the American government and American society. And I've always said, and I think you agree, that the most influence that the Jewish people can have is from here, from the land of Israel. And from here, we are able to have the most influence on everyone. So if they come home, this is where, and especially today you can understand it more than ever before, because before, if you were far away in a distant land, maybe you wouldn't have influence on the world. But like we were saying, today with modern technology, we can have the most influence being a nation in our own land.
Okay, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
In a time where feelings have become fact, where rational thought and common sense has disappeared, one man stands above it all.
I'm Howie Sobiker, your political hitman.
Political Hitman airs every Tuesday at 11:59 p.m. North American time, 7 a.m. Israeli time, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
Are you interested in transforming your life, drawing closer to the Creator, and uncovering the deeper meanings and hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
and me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Hello, hello. Welcome back to Israel Unplugged. And we have a caller on the line, Zev from Jerusalem. Zev, hello, hello. How are you?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
Good, Baruch Hashem. How can we help you?
Thank you very much. So I saw Mr. Wander, whatever, however it's pronounced, posted on his Facebook about talking about Aliyah. And should people be pro? My feeling on the matter is that I am pro Aliyah, but only under the right circumstance. If you're coming to Israel to be part of Eretz Yisrael, to be part of the Jewish people, to give back to the Jewish people, to live in the land where I can take my kids to Marat HaMachpelah and show them Marat HaMachpelah and go and say, this is like I do the Parsha every week with my kids, and I say, this is this on the map. We can go there. We can see it. If that's why you want to make Aliyah, then come here. Be my guest. You'll be successful. But if you're coming because you're worried about anti-Semitism, you're worried about certain other things, I would be very, very cautious about doing that because I don't feel that may be the correct reason. Because I've seen too many people come here because they're worried about anti-Semitism, and they find other reasons to be upset when they get here, and it becomes a very, very hard life to be here. Living in Israel, living in Israel is not easy. I've had my fair share of issues being here. I've been here for almost 6 years, jobs and everything, and I've Baruch Hashem been able to be successful, and my family's been able to prosper. But it's not been easy. And if I didn't have that mentality of I want to be here to be in a land where my family has wanted to be for years, to be able to show my kids the benefits of being in Eretz Yisrael, show them that this is things part of Tanakh, I don't think I would have been successful. I wouldn't have been able to stick it out.
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for expressing that. We really appreciate it. We agree 100%. First of all, Josh is not with us. He had to go somewhere, so it's just me now. But we've said this many, many times on the show that the main reason a Jew should want to live in Israel is for all the positive reasons, exactly like what you're saying. But we also do acknowledge, and we have to acknowledge the fact that things are happening in the world that might be able to serve as a wake-up call for Jews to at least maybe start thinking about it.
Not arguing with that, but if that's your sole reason for making Aliyah, you're already making things harder for yourself when you get here. Is what I feel, because I've seen so many people make Aliyah because of anti-Semitism, and then struggle mightily when they get here because they're expecting it to be kind of like what people expected America to be, the streets paved with gold. And people are coming to Israel expecting to be welcomed with open arms and loving, and things are going to become much better than they were wherever they were, Europe, United States. It's not necessarily the case. And to come with that rosy attitude of everything is going to be great and everything's going to be amazing is something that is very, very concerning. It should be very, very concerning for anybody who is advocating for Aliyah. Is my stance. Hold on one second.
I agree with you, but there is this concept in rabbinic literature called mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma, that when a person does something, a mitzvah, one of God's commands, not for the right reasons, we hope that it will lead him to come and do it for the right reason. So, yes, it might be that the initial reason why he was woken up to think about the idea was the anti-Semitism. But, it could be that eventually he'll fall in love with it. But I agree 100% that it's not an easy thing to do, and a person has to have the right mindset. He has to understand a very fundamental idea which our caller brought up, and that is that the land of Israel is acquired through suffering, and there's no other way around it. It has to be a difficult process because God wants to make sure that you're here for the right reasons. And if you come thinking that everything's going to be peachy keen and perfect, then you're in for a big surprise. But on the other hand, there are people. I mean, let's face it. A lot of the people who came after the Holocaust came because they were running away, and a lot of the Jews from the Arab countries that came at the beginning of the state were because they were being kicked out of their lands. Now, it was a hard process, but they eventually made it, and the Jewish people now are thriving. Generation or two later, because those people were kicked out of the lands that they were living in. So too, we have to again, we should come because this is where we belong. But we do have to also keep our ears and eyes open to what's going on in the world and take it as maybe a sign from God that it's time to leave already the lands of exile. Thank you, Zev, for your question and your comments. We very much appreciate it. So now we're going to move on to a little bit more about the sin of the spies. You know, one of the important aspects that has to be emphasized is the fact that the spies themselves, these 10 people, were, as the Torah puts it, kulam anashim rashi b'nei Yisrael hema. They were all men. And Rashi points out that when it says men, it means important, chashuv people, right? Important people, that they were tzaddikim. They were righteous at the time. And they were Rashi b'nei Yisrael. They were the leaders of the Jewish people. They were leaders of the Jewish people, let's put it that way. Not the leaders. They weren't on the level of Moses and Aaron, but they were definitely amongst the great ones of the generation. And look at the mistake they made. Look at the mistake they made, even though they were leaders, even though they were great. And we learn a very important lesson from that, and that is that there is something about the land of Israel. There's something about this whole issue that trips up even some very great people. I'm not going to say names because who am I? I'm a nobody. But, you know, put it this way. I don't think that anybody could use it as an excuse saying that, you know, so-and-so, this great rabbi says that Zionism is terrible and is awful and evil, and there's no obligation, no even reason to come and live in Israel nowadays. For somebody to rely themselves on such a rabbi, besides the fact that the majority of rabbis disagree with such rabbis, and the fact that many, again, the vast majority believe that it is a mitzvah throughout the ages, it is a commandment, a fulfillment of a biblical commandment to live in the land of Israel, no matter what time, no matter what generation one's living in. Besides that fact, we also have to take into consideration the fact that on this issue, sometimes even very great men make a big mistake. And I want to read to you something that I found and that I put into my book, Eretz Yisrael and the Parsha. It says like this. This is from, I'll tell you who is this a quote from one of the Mefarshim, one of the commentators whose book was called Gililei Zahav. I'm sorry to say, but I don't know who that was. I could look it up, but I didn't. He writes as follows. Whenever it says men, anashim, it refers to righteous men. That is what the Midrash says. We must explain, he says, why the Torah mentions all of these compliments. It says they were righteous, everyone was a leader among them, they were all important men, heads of the children of Israel, and the very fact that Moshe chose them and Hashem agreed. All these things are unbelievable. Moshe chose them. God agreed to each one of them. Why did Torah have to go out of its way to tell us this about the spies who eventually brought back a bad report? So answers the Galilei Zahav like this. All of this contains a lesson for the future. As it says regarding the generation of the wilderness, it says, he established a testimony in Yaakov. This is verses from Tehillim. He established a testimony in Yaakov so that the final generation may know and tell their children, and not become like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that did not set its heart aright. In other words, David HaMelech, King David, is telling us here that a lot of the things that happened in the Midbar, in the generation of the wilderness, is really meant to be a lesson for future generations. And it goes like this. The Torah emphasizes and specifies all of these virtues of the spies so that the final generation, which we believe we're living in, the final generation may know that when remembrance and salvation visit Israel, meaning when we see that there's something big happening and the Jewish people are being redeemed, being remembered by God, we must not believe those who oppose the redemption of the land, even if they are presumed to be upright and righteous, even if they are leaders of Israel, and even if the one who knows all, i.e. God, even if the one who knows all secrets testifies that they are tzaddikim, because that's what happened here. The Torah itself testifies in God's name, right, that kulam anashim, they were all tzaddikim. And nonetheless, we're not supposed that should not influence us, and that should not impress us in the slightest. Why? Because they will eventually discourage the people of Israel from entering the land. Therefore, do not place your trust in them, for in the end, their disgrace will be exposed like that of the spies. These are very harsh words, but something that really, unfortunately, needs to be said. People, look into the issue yourself. Look into what our rabbis say. Look into what the Torah says. Don't just go blindly behind somebody who says the opposite. Say, oh, he's a great rabbi, and therefore he must be right. He must know what he's talking about. Because that was partially the sin of the spies. Okay, we run out of time, so please join us again next week at the same time. Yitraot. Bye-bye.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
Howdy, this is Rita from League City, Texas, now living in Israel. And though my heart may have belonged to Texas, it now belongs to Israel and all the fantastic show hosts at Israel News Talk Radio.
Hi, this is Michael Solomon from Kiryat Arba, Israel. And why do I love listening to Israel News Talk Radio? Because I love listening to the interesting interviews they do and their news reporting that most other media sources don't cover.
Hey, this is Nicoleko from Malmö, Sweden. It gets pretty cold here in Sweden, so I love cuddling up with a warm cup of tea while I listen to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey everybody, this is Frank Morris from Tennessee. Me and my dog Buster really love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.